session and the terrific speakers that I'm looking forward to introducing. Welcome to UVU's 13th Humanities Symposium on Environmental Humanities. This year's is a special symposium that introduces and celebrates the newly minted BS degree in humanities. Complementing the AA and the BA degrees offered by our program, the new BS degree highlights the uniquely interdisciplinary nature of our program by allowing our majors to substitute the second language requirements of a traditional BA to pursue emphases like medical humanities, business humanities, environmental humanities, and other fields in applied humanities. Today's symposium has featured interdisciplinary presentations on visual art, ecology, literature, and more given by UVU students, faculty from UVU and BYU, and local artists and authors. We just enjoyed a terrific keynote address by Terry Tempest Williams called Wild Mercy, which we won't soon forget. We'd like to thank our co-sponsors, Integrated Studies, the Department of Political Science and History and Earth Science, College of Humanities and Social Sciences, College of Science, Innovation Academy, the Center for Social Impact, and the Center for the Study of Ethics. And now I'd like to introduce the three speakers for this session. I'm holding books by each of them that I've really enjoyed reviewing or reading in my preparation to introduce them today. I'm just going to introduce all three of them, and then I'll get out of the way and let them talk. Sam Rushforth, a really great friend of mine, his biography refers to his forceful support of academic freedom, and I have personally benefited from that, and I want to thank him for that forceful support. In his book, Wild Rides and Wild Flowers, co-authored with the director of this symposium, Scott Abbott, Sam writes, "Red foxes are introduced in North America 200 years ago by fox hunters. Now they're all across the continent. Most people are happy to see foxes, but as Barry Commoner states in his first law of ecology, everything's connected to everything else." Sam gets specific about the problem at Strawberry Reservoir, where the red fox is contributing to pushing the native sage grouse toward extinction and getting a boost from the elimination of coyotes and the introduction of the kokanee salmon. I want to just read a quick passage from his book. Got too much stuff to hold here. So here's a case where a species was introduced in the East for sport, has expanded its range all over the West, increases substantially due to the elimination of a native predator, and gets a boost from an expanded food resource, yet another introduced species. In the spring, the foxes prey on sage grouse, pushing the species nearer to extinction. Like the man says, everything is connected to everything else. I think that in this passage, which is why I chose to read it, you really get a sense of Sam, his knowledge, his charm, his talent as a teacher. That, and it's just a real pleasure to be he and Nancy's friend. Brooke Williams, his bio mentions his exploration of both the inner and outer wilderness. It's a good metaphor to describe his work. I recently read Open Midnight, and this book is a fascinating tale of mapping roads in Utah wilderness and of connecting with a dead ancestor named William by occupying the same wild spaces William once occupied. Reading Open Midnight helped me to see how wilderness is a time conduit that connects us to past generations in the same way that art and literature do. I have more practice using art and literature in this way than wilderness. I usually have those sensations of connection indoors with books. But Mr. Williams helped me realize that wild places have provided similar connections for me. He asks really good and difficult questions like, what has happened to America? And I find his quest for answers authentic. His book inspires me to become re-enchanted with the companionship and solitude of wilderness. And finally, Steve Peck. He gives me the chance to quote one of my favorites. Emily Dickinson said, quote, "I know something is poetry if I feel physically as if the top of my head were taken off." That was the sensation I had when I heard Steve Peck read his poem, "The Worst Thing I've Ever Done." It's about a mistake he made as a father, and it really struck me. It struck me as a mother, I have to admit. It wasn't just about one man's experience, but about the larger issue of what it is to be human. I really enjoyed his clever biography of Gilda Trillam, Shepherdess of Rats. It combines a chapter on junk drawer ecology with profound questions of free will and ethical care. An easy move from humor to consequence is characteristic of his work. Sharp consequences present in his collaboration with Jackie Leishman. You should look it up on Flyway. You can see it online. He's created found poems by harvesting words from peer-reviewed scientific literature on climate change, and they are paired with Leishman's abstract paintings. One of his poems, which appears next to a fiery red work by Leishman, is the repetition of the words, quote, "increased wildfire activity," over and over again for 30 lines. It's like a loud, incessant scream, which feels exactly right for the moment that we're in. Enjoy our speakers.
Hi, I'm Sam Rushforth, and I'm wearing a hat because and I'm bald. But I'm wearing, not to hide my baldness, but because it's cold in here and my head gets cold. So I had a bunch of students down with me at Arches one time, and we went to a concert, and one of the guys was wearing a hat, and he took the hat off, and he was bald. And, oh, my students were so mad that this guy was hiding his baldness, but I'm not. I'm just got a cold head. It's always good for me to hear Ben and Terry speak and to read their stuff, because they're optimistic, and I'm not. So it's a very different point of view to listen to them, and maybe they're right, maybe so. And I actually look at things from a point of view of Genevieve Atwood, which is there's a lot of time ahead, and the Earth has already been around a long time, and it's going to be around a lot longer. The Odoms estimated, a couple of ecologists, very, very important ecologists, 30 years ago, 25 years ago, they estimated that the carrying capacity of the Earth for humans at a moderate, decent lifestyle was about 2 billion people. Well, we have overshot that slightly, and we now have about 8 billion people. So if I were just an ecologist watching the reset of the Earth, I'd love it. I would watch to see what's ahead in the next years, because you're going to see things that have never happened before. We're going to see the shrinking of the human population enormously. Anyway, that's just my prediction, and so I don't find that pessimistic. The Earth's going to survive. And our species, we haven't done so much. We have done probably a heck of a lot more damage than we have good. But that remains to be talked about. Today I'm going to pick up a discussion a little bit about the human condition and go from there to just a couple of stories. Human beings are born neontenous. And what that means is that we are born as embryos. Human children, human infants, they don't stand up and go suckle their mom and the next day be eating the grass in the pasture. They have no idea how to be humans, and the human condition is such that they have to be taught. We learn to be humans. And guess what? It can fail. And it can also go very, very well. But for a lot of people on the planet, we are now in a situation where their environment is such that failure becomes much more likely. So That's where we are. And if you look at the caste system in America, and if you look at the amount of poverty, and if you look at the fact that 1% of the population owns more, has more wealth than the bottom 60% of our population, these are things that are very, very wrong. And they are things that ultimately will bring us, in my opinion, to destruction. But back to the Neontony story. I taught a course for many years called On Becoming Human. I taught it at BYU in the Honors Department. I taught it at the University of Utah in the Honors Department. I taught it here with Reba Keel and Lucille Stoddard, and I usually team taught it. And we discussed what it took to learn to be a functional human being. And it's a year-long course and pretty rigorous. And so I'm just going to summarize a bit of that right now and say one of the most important things that we learn during those early years is stories. Stories guide us. The stories that we hear from our parents, the stories that we hear from our peers. Plus now we have learned, and if I were going into biology again, I would pay a lot more attention to this, that there's extra genetic information, that as we grow during our very earliest years, the DNA of our chromosomes gets methylated, and its expression can be dramatically changed depending upon the environment. I don't know if you have ever thought of such a thing. When I was growing up through the ranks, let's see, I was in college 91 years ago. When I was growing up through the ranks, we always were taught about the one gene, one trait hypothesis. Well, in other words, one piece of DNA generates one piece of RNA, generates a trait. Nothing could be further than the truth. It is just not so. And almost every trait in human beings is influenced by, hundreds of genes. We have about 22,000 genes. By the way, ferns have over 100,000 genes. But we have about 22,000 genes, and they all influence each other. That's a little bit of an overstatement. Anyway, we learn how to become human, and our environment also shapes our chromosomes and also shapes the human path that we take. It shapes who we are. So this course on becoming human was a real pleasure to teach, especially with the people I was able to teach it with. And I wanted to talk to you now. I'm just going to shift gears for a minute and leave a year's worth of that course and talk about some stories. Let's talk just a minute about the invasion of North America and South America by the European white settlers that came here, and what they did to the land and what they have done to our opinion about one another and about how we treat the land and about how we treat each other. Well, you know that Columbus discovered America, we all know, 1492. Well, in 1493, Pope Alexander VI issued a papal bull. I mean, it's a papal bull. It's not short for anything, but Nancy said I couldn't say it was papal bullshit because some of you would be Catholics and would feel badly. Oh, and I've had too much coffee. I'm really not terribly nervous, but I'm coffeed up. Anyway, he says, out of our own soul largesse and certain knowledge, and out of the fullness of our apostolic power, by the authority of Almighty God, conferred upon us in blessed Peter and the vicarship of Jesus Christ, which we hold on earth, do by tenor of these presents, should any of said islands have been found in your envoys and explorations. Anyway, they should go to Spain. I'm sorry, really, that's irritating. Anyway, and the end of this is, and we make, appoint, and depute you. Oh, that's good. Willa June, my granddaughter. And depute you with free and full power and authority, jurisdiction of every kind. So that's the story with which we start the incursion of North America. We, the white settlers, have all of the power we need. We have all of the authority we need to treat the land and treat the people any way we want. In other words, you're now starting to hear a lot of discussion about white Christian nationalism. We started out as a white Christian nationalist incursion from Europe. Now let me move to one of my favorite authors, with the help of my favorite granddaughter. And he says, by the way, Barry Lopez, wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. Probably many of you have read him. I think I've read everything he's written. Terry and Brooke introduced me to him one night at King's English. But this little book called The Rediscovery of North America, I would recommend it to every one of you. It's a superb book. And here's about 3, 4, 5 pages in. This is after the Papal Bull. What followed for decades upon this discovery were the acts of criminals: murder, rape, theft, kidnapping, vandalism, child molestation, acts of cruelty, torture, and humiliation. Bartolome de las Casas, who arrived in Hispaniola in 1502, hold that page, 1502, and later became a priest, was an eyewitness to what he called the obdurate and dreadful temper of the Spanish, which attended their unlimited and close-fisted avarice, their vicious search for wealth. One day in front of Las Casas, the Spanish dismembered, beheaded, or raped 3,000 people. Such inhumanities and barbarisms were committed in my sight, he says, as no age can parallel. The Spanish cut off the legs of the children who ran from them. They poured people full of boiling soap. They made bets as to who, with one sweep of his sword, could cut a person in half. They loosed dogs that devoured an Indian like a hog at first sight in less than a moment. They used nursing infants for dog food. So on and on it goes. That's good. I'm through now. Thanks, Will. On it goes, and Barry Lopez tells us about the invasion of North America and what has happened since. Now I'm just going to jump ahead 350 years and pick up where Terry went with the Northwestern Shoshone. They were dwindling at the time of the Bear River, which was called for many, many years by the U.S. Army, the Bear River Battle at Bear River. It was a massacre, the biggest massacre in the history of the United States, where 450, maybe somewhere around there, men, women, and children were all killed and left on the ground. There were a total of 45 casualties in the Army, 20 deaths, and 25, 30, 40 wounds. They left the people, as Terry mentioned, on the ground to where they fell. No thought for what would become of them, no care for what would become of them. Now, how did we get here from there? Well, Willow Valley, which is what the Shawnee called Cache Valley, was settled by Mormons who came up to the valley, and across the next 15 years after they came to the valley quickly after they came to Willow Valley, quite quickly after they came to Salt Lake Valley, and they began farming and ranching and using the traditional Shawnee lands for their own use. By the time 15 years had gone by, the Shawnee were absolutely decimated. They had the animals were gone, their prairies were gone to hunt and gather, and so they were reduced to thievery or starvation. And the thievery got Brigham Young's notice, who was the governor of the territory, and he said, well, we can't have this anymore. So 2 years before that, Colonel Connor had come up with the 3rd California Regiment from California to Fort Williams in Salt Lake City. He was in Salt Lake City, and his troops were very restless because they wanted to go to the Civil War, and as they have been quoted many times, we want to go there and kill people. And they felt very hogtied to have to stay in Cache Valley, Willow Valley, and not be able to go join the Civil War. Well, they were, as you might think, they were quite excited to be called by Brigham Young. Connor got his men together, and at the 1863, the end of January, they made an incursion up to Willow Valley, and they knew, because Orrin Porter Rockwell, Brigham Young's personal scout and personal man and personal brewmaster, was their guide. And they took him, they showed Connor where the Indians were camped, and Connor attacked at first light and killed these people, and it was an absolute slaughter. And then after the battle, the Indians lived, the Shawnee lived on a creek they called Beaver Creek, although that's not really quite what it was called. But then the U.S. Army claimed it, or renamed it to Battle Creek. Well, it should have been called Massacre Creek or Blood Creek or Gore Creek or something of the sort. At any rate, a few of the Shawnee survived. Some of them, as Terry mentioned, went on to reservations. Several of them moved to Preston, which was only 20 miles away, or less than that actually. And they joined the Mormon Church and became assimilated as Mormon people. They have never, there were two Indian chiefs, Bureau of Indian Affairs heads that both recommended that the Shawnee be given a reservation in Willow Valley. That was never acted upon by the Bureau of Reclamation. So to this day, not quite to this day, but until just a few years ago, they had no land at all. And then Terry tells the story, which is an absolutely wonderful story, about the band getting together, the remnants getting together and saying, we have to have a site to remember our ancestors. And you know why the site was very important? And they began the reconstruction of Beaver Creek by getting rid of the indigenous species and planting the native species, native grasses, getting rid of the salt cedars, the tamarisk, and other kinds of things. And now the land is beginning to flourish. They actually have worked with hydrologists, conservation ecologists, conservation biologists from Utah State University, and they are assuming now, if all goes well according to their calculations, they will return 12,000 acre-feet of water to the Bear River, which will flow into the Great Salt Lake. Now, they care deeply about the Great Salt Lake because their origin story is from Antelope Island. The northwestern Shoshone Band originated on Antelope Island. That was their birthplace as a tribe. And then they endured for, a couple of thousand or more years in the land until the white incursion from the west, and this particular one was mostly Mormon. And now, as Terry has told us, the Shoshone have bought the land, and they are going to return this water. Now, here's the deal. The land that they have bought is in Franklin County, Idaho. It has to cross the border into Utah, and it has to, therefore, the water that goes into the Bear River will be adjudicated by the state of Utah. So I give it less than a 10% chance that that water ever gets to the Great Salt Lake. And regardless of, Ben is so optimistic. I love to hear Ben talk, as I say, and he was saying good things about the legislature this morning. Well, my notice of the legislature is, fool me once, my bad. Fool me twice, well, my bad more. Fool me 3 times, well, I can't believe I'm being so silly. Fool me 4 times, well, my God, the Utah legislature must be in session. So that's exactly what is happened, and they did set up a Utah Lake Commission this year, comprised of members of the 4 water conservancy districts, who are not water conservancy districts any more than they're as much as they are water development districts. So their sole function is to find sources for the state of Utah for water, and they will do so in various kinds of ways. But in their charter, it suggests that they are not to mess with the Bear River project or any of the Colorado River projects. Okay, so far so bad. Not only that, the bill, by the way, that was carried by the President of the Senate and the Speaker of the House, so it had a 100% chance of passing, it evades all public scrutiny. No public meetings, no minutes kept, no announcement of when the meetings will be held, no Freedom of Information Acts, no nothing. In the end, they will be in charge of more than $200 million, and they will essentially show us the way, quote, into the future of the water of Utah. And they will, and in fact, I think it's a virtual certainty, irrespective of Terry and Ben, that the Bear River is dammed. And that's damned with an M and damned with a D-A-M-N-E-D, because our legislature, they have very different stories. They are not moved by an origin story from Antelope Island. They don't believe themselves to be white incursionists. They believe themselves to be the smartest people who ever lived and know best for all of us. So they are going to tell us what to do with our water. They are going to develop or tell us which projects will be developed. We don't even have a say-so. We don't even get to look at their minutes. So that's fool me 4 times. Oh my God, the legislature's in session. And that's, anyway, that's one of the things, one of the stories that I wanted to mention to you. And I think that's a horrific story, but it's also a story that is pretty illustrative of how we have treated all of the Native Americans in the United States. By the way, Colonel Connor led the men from Fort Williams up to the Shawnee Massacre. And then he did fight in the Civil War for a short period of time, but then he went back to his true calling. And he came back to the West and was involved in slaughter after slaughter after slaughter, and ended up killing tens of thousands of natives. And that's his claim to fame. So we have the clash of cultures that have occurred, a culture that knows how to live on the land, a culture that conserves, a culture that cares, and we now live in a culture that doesn't care. And Ben and Terry and so many of my other dear friends, they carry the notion that we can do it and that we're going to move ahead and we're going to save the Great Salt Lake. I don't think so, but I'm surely willing to toss my hat in and do everything I can. In fact, I've studied the Great Salt Lake for 50 years. Studied it during wet times, studied it during dry times, studied it during some of its very lowest times, looking for thermophile and halophile cyanobacteria and sending them off to various laboratories around the world so that they could figure out how to grow them and extract the chemicals the darn things make to make them so resistant to heat and salt. Anyway, I've had a really good time working on the Great Salt Lake. It's been very important to me. If I had time, I would tell you the second story I was going to, which is I grew up on the edge of Great Salt Lake in a very tumultuous household. It wasn't a fun place to be. So very early on, as a boy, I lived in Kaysville. I was only 2 miles from the marshes. So I started marching down to the marshes, and all during high school. It was an attendance optional school for me. I went when I chose. And the other days I was down in the marshes on the Great Salt Lake. And we became very friendly, and now I recognize and remember those marshes I used to wade in, and then in the winter when they froze, I would skate for miles and miles on those marshes. Now guess what? There are homes there. And our whole area is filling up with these condominiums and small homes, and all of us are demanding water. And there are options ahead, and I guess I'm going to quit here. But I wanted to just give you wanted to say one last thing about our options. Governor Cox, 2 years ago, stood at the edge of the Great Salt Lake and held out his arms like Moses, and he said, "This lake will not dry up on my watch." The next week after that, he held a water development conference wherein he said, there are 220 sites in the state of Utah where we can dam waters and conserve water for the use of agriculture. Now, you have to remember that Governor Cox is an alfalfa farmer. And he's not very big on the fact, on saying, gosh, we ought to refigure out agriculture because alfalfa uses half of the water we use in Utah. The answer is in front of our face. We need to limit and control carefully the amount of alfalfa that is grown and the amount of alfalfa that is shipped out. Now, who's going to be against that? The same people that were against automobiles because they've repaired horse and buggies. Alfalfa is a crop that has outgrown its usefulness. It is not any longer the crop that should be grown in the state of Utah, in my opinion. We need other fixes as well. Terry and Ben have both given us a whole bunch of information about that. But the clear thing is, the number one, the low-hanging fruit, is alfalfa. Are we going to do anything about it? It's not likely. It's not likely. Maybe some, maybe a little bit. But I think ahead, looking down the road, I think the lake will dry up. But the lake's not over. It's like Genevieve says. It'll come back. Our whole earth will come back. It's our species that's in danger. And it is. We are in danger, every one of us. So fool me once, fool me twice. Don't be fooled the fourth time. If you get a chance, get involved in the legislature. Talk to your legislators. Tell them that you care about the Great Salt Lake. By the way, I phone and call my legislators and committee members, oh gosh, 15, 20, 30 times a session dealing with green issues. And it does, I don't know what impact it has, but it impacts me. So we need to be doing these kinds of things, and I'm going to continue to do what Ben and Terry have told us, but I also do it with a limited optimism because I think our avarice and greed that penetrates our species, perpetrates the kinds of actions that we have been doing for the last 150 plus years in the valleys, 175 years, in Cache Valley, in Utah Valley, all over the state, and the way, mirrored by the way we have treated our indigenous peoples and our indigenous species. Well, that's all I'm going to say. Thanks.
Hello, my name's Brooke Williams. Thank you for that beautiful introduction. Scott, thanks for having me. These three, Scott and Sam and Steve, are part of my intellectual foundation, and we do need to get together and talk about the anger I hold of Cormac McCarthy's last two novels.
Yes.
Sam's is really a key element of my conscience. He's always been this way. And I think about him all the time. We don't see a lot of each other, but I think about him all the time in terms of what would Sam be doing right now? What's Sam thinking? And for a long time he was on Facebook and I could read about it. But I think you got off because it was just, he just got too angry about what he saw there. And Stephen, I think I've told so many people, I think you're one of the most creative people I know. So many different things you can do, write novels and do science and also poetry. And Scott, I had the opportunity to meet your oldest granddaughter, well, maybe not your oldest granddaughter, but Ingrid the other day. And she was so proud that she was the only one of her friends that had a grandpa with a ponytail. I'm on a mission, and my mission is to help re-enchant the world, which I'll talk about. It all started with a dream about 15 years ago. I was literally on an island at a conference, and I was napping in the afternoon, and I had a dream in which a dragonfly appeared. And when I woke up, I thought about that dream, and it wasn't that surprising. I have a lot of dreams. I'd never dreamed about a dragonfly, and it didn't seem all that significant until within 15 minutes I started seeing dragonflies. And since then I've had hundreds of encounters with dragonflies, and I've spent those last 15 or 20 years learning more about dragonflies in terms of their biology and their mythology and their symbology and their histories, but also wondering why that dragonfly arrived in my dream, because it was just too weird to have a dream and then there they are. And it wasn't until like 3 years ago, I was at a lecture at Harvard. A man was giving a talk about his book. His name was Jason Josephson Storm, and he had written a book called The Myth of Disenchantment. And as he talked, I realized that maybe what had happened to me during that dream was that my life had been re-enchanted, or that I had discovered that my life was enchanted. That book was interesting in that it gave me a lot of background. It's really an academic book, so it's hard to read. I still have not read it cover to cover, but I love the index, especially because of all the references that it has in it. And his idea was that with modernity, the Earth, which had previously been enchanted for as long as we'd been a species, had become disenchanted with mainly the commodification of nature during modernity. And the point is that I think up until that point, the Earth was a subject, something with which we interacted, and it became an object, something that we maneuver and use and buy and sell. And I think what happened was when we realized that we could cut down whole forests of trees to make temples and prisons and forts, we could no longer have those trees contain tree spirits. So we just shifted our point of view and decided there were no tree spirits. These trees were there for our use and our sale. And that led to sort of where we are now. And my idea is that if the commodification of nature is the seed for part of our mainly part of our serious problem of climate change, which may be the most serious problem that our species has ever faced. If it has its seeds in disenchantment, then maybe part of the solution lies in reenchantment. It makes perfect sense to me. So I'm not sure exactly what that means, but I've been thinking a lot about it. And I got real serious about it a few years ago. For years I've known that I was probably going to have heart issues based on my genetic propensity. My mother died after her second open heart surgery at age 62. And the doctor at the time took my siblings and I together, took us aside and said, pay attention to your hearts, because whatever caused this in your mother is probably causing it in you too. So for those years, I did pay attention. And a few years ago, I started having a little, it's like a clench in the middle of my chest, nothing very serious. And finally realized that maybe I should get it checked. And one thing led to another, and I was in open heart surgery. When that surgery was finished, the surgeon went into the waiting room where Terry had been waiting for 8 hours, 2 or 3 hours longer than she had planned. And apparently the way she tells the story, I wasn't there, I was still recovering. The way she tells the story is that he came and he was sweating and he was quite stressed. And the first words out of his mouth were, "Why isn't he dead?" And when I heard that, I kind of freaked out, because that's a big question. And I thought about it for a long time. And of course, there were maybe some physical reasons that I wasn't dead. But I actually went to therapy, and I saw my friend Paul, who's an older man who does therapy. And we talked, and he said, well, maybe you're not dead because you still have work to do. And you must be doing it because you're still alive, which made me feel good for about a week, that I was still alive because I was doing what I should be doing. But I wasn't sure what it was I was doing exactly. Then I realized that as I was thinking about what reenchantment meant, that maybe that's my work, is to help reenchant the world. So I've started to really work on that. And in fact, over the years of thinking about dragonflies and why they came into my dream and what reenchantment is all about, I have a book contract that I need to write a book about this, which I'm very excited about, because it's going to help me further develop this idea. But whenever I get a chance, I talk about this, and I realize that a lot of people think that the world needs reenchanting. And I don't know how it's going to all work, and it's really kind of out of my control, because being not dead when maybe you should have been dead, it's really freeing. It's like I don't have to worry about what happens, because all I have to do is commit to asking the planet every morning what I need to do for it to make the best use of me. And as I've been doing that, I realize that things have just really fallen into place. And I see a real big group of people here, and if any of you are interested in reenchantment, you can be part of my team. So I'm really happy to be here. I hope there's some questions, and you get to talk now, Stephen.
Stand fine, bro. I'm glad you're not dead.
It is such a pleasure to be here on this panel with two of my heroes, and they've been my heroes for a long time, and so I'm really honored to be here. I'm still a little teary-eyed over Terry's prayer. It was so beautiful. My daughter's in divinity school at Yale, right next door, and she's studying environmental divinity. And I was hearing it through her ears, and I love that perspective. I teach a class at BYU in the honors department on the music of birds and humans with a music professor. And for me, birds and their sounds and the sounds of the world have become really vital to me and become a new way of thinking. And I tell my birds and music students, and they think I'm joking, but I'm not, that there's as much truth in poetry and music as there is in science. We need them both. I have a neurological splitting or something going on in my head, and I see, I have to close one eye or the other to actually recognize people and things. And what I've realized is that it's all of the human activities that we participate in that give us a better dimensional view of what we are and what we can become and what's possible. And I'm going to talk about a project that I've been involved with for quite a while, and the way that our art project has emerged has reinforced in my mind the way that what emerges on this earth and this planet through evolution and through in the environment is a profound statement on the universe's propensity to creativity. I really believe that there is this drive towards complexity and novelty and creativity that I just find really profound. And so I'm going to be talking about sunsets today a little bit, but I want to first talk about the role that poetry, I think, plays in understanding where we are in the universe. And this was a group of poems I participated in that Torrey House Press did on Utah Lake stories. And this to me got to things. Ben did such amazing science on this, and it was these poetic responses that I think became a demonstration of values. Where poetry can depict values and things like that, we need science as well. We need both sides of the story. This project that I had the opportunity to work with Jackie Leishman, she's an LA-based abstract artist, and she just did a show 2 days ago at the Swanee Museum in Southern California. And working with her has been one of the great experiences of my life, because I think the way that we worked demonstrated the way that ecologies work and the way that things emerge in the universe, the incredible diversity we find in the planet, on planet Earth, the beauty, our understanding of its depths. And so this project that we did, we called our first project together. I'm going to talk about several projects that we've done together. Our first project was called Decreation. And the way that it worked, and this was fairly successful. We published this in multiple art poetry journals like Whitefish Review, Cold Mountain Review, Flyway, and other venues. But I think what made it so powerful was our process. So if this was the one from Whitefish Review, what you see is what looks like ekphrastic poetry, where I'm writing a poem in response to her art. But it's really was a dynamic. So, for example, if you can find that one like on the third row and 4 over. And so I want to talk about the process that we did, because I think it is an example of collaboration and connection that I think allows much more than just, for example, the typical ekphrastic poetry would be just a poetic response to a work of art. But we began this conversation, and the conversation produced things like this. And I'll read this poem. But the way that we worked was we've been doing this for 6 years now, and it's been wildly productive for my thinking and for my artistic work and hers. But the way that it would work was we'd have a conversation. We'd talk about things. We talked about climate change. We talked about the science. We'd talk about the the things going on in the world. All of our conversations were on the phone, but we would agree to watch a movie. We'd agree to read a book. We'd agree to do this, and then we'd come together, and she would paint something. So this is like version 1 of maybe 10 conversations that we'd have. And so she would paint something, and then I'd give a poetic response. And then she would take that poetic response, and then she would redo her painting, rethink it. And then in light of that, I'd change my poetry. And the way that I did in the project Decreation, the way that it worked is the poetic title was actually the scientific paper that I drew the words from to create the poem. So I'll just read this one. So this poem is entitled "More than 75% Decline Over 27 Years in Total Flying Insect Biomass in Protected Areas." So it doesn't sound like a very poetic poem. And then the reference is always at the bottom of the poem that the poem came from. So this is what I extracted from this paper as a poem. European grassland butterflies declined 50%. Bees, the same. Hence, biomass data were collected in 63 areas. Our results: average airborne insect biomass, dramatic decline of 76%. Flying insect community has been decimated over last few decades. Insect decline, alarming. All traps were placed in protected areas meant to preserve ecosystem function and diversity. Preserve ecosystem function and diversity. Preserve ecosystem function and diversity. Diversity. Cascading effects across trophic levels. Numerous ecosystem effects. Numerous ecosystem effects. Effects. So that's the way that all of these, there's that many poems in the Decreation project. I'll read one more just for fun. This is from the poem. An Arctic predator-prey system in flux. Climate change impacts on coastal space used by polar bears and ring seals. Abiotic changes currently occurring in the Arctic expected to be severe. Polar bears dependent on sea ice platform for hunting seals. Barents Sea, Svalbard sea ice declining faster than other Arctic areas. The decreased accessibility of ring seals to polar bears effects on other parts of ecosystem. Deprived of food source, bears moved greater distances in close proximity to ground nesting bird colonies. Shift to avian prey, substantial local effects on ground nesting bird colonies. And so all of the artwork and poetry for this was actually purchased by BYU's library for something. I'm not quite sure what, but and so we've continued to work, and we've continued to work on other projects. She works in paint, in drawing, and collage for the most part. And we started a project recently trying to look at fragmentation and the meaning of that. And so this is the way that this is a picture of how she works. On the right is on the left. I have to figure out where I am. Is her working on a work. And you can see in the corner she's put up the poetry that's going with it, and this is how she begins her responses. That her response isn't just to look at it; she thinks about it. She reads what I've provided, and then she changes what she's doing in light of that. And we go in this back and forth until there's an emergence that we both agree is done, and we don't call it finished until we both agreed that we've hit on exactly what we wanted to say. A second project we did, Andy Pritchard Davis's cabin burned down in the Lonesome Fire. And we did a project on that, looking at the effect of fire in ecosystems. And I've got a few to show this. And so we did the same process. This is her work, sort of looking at how at forests, their lushness, their beauty. And one of the things I forgot to mention over here in Jackie's work, one of the things about her work is, according to Florence Williams, who wrote about the benefits of nature, is that one thing that our enjoyment of nature increases in proportion to its fractal dimension. A fractal dimension is measure of complexity. And Jackie's art has this kind of really high dimensionality, high fractal dimension. And so we did this. I'll just read one of the poems from this project. We were looking at the way the ecosystems fall apart and become depauperate. And so I'll read this this one too. So this is kind of found poetry that I provide the founding text for. It's kind of strange, but so I'll read this poem. And what's going to happen is each stanza group is going to draw from this initial poetic work and then become less and less as time goes on. Rain falls in a whisper of sound mixing in complex tones. Water slides down toward a furrowed ash trunk growing from living soil where roots lie embedded, connecting earth and sky. A finch, its feathers flumped against wetting tendencies, huddles waiting for time to ripen, and his song join in rhythm with the dripping leaves, remembering the dying storm. A slight breeze stirs the graceful from holding tight with naked feet to look around for a sparrowhawk who might still his repose and reflection on the affordance seeds proffer in their protection and doubt. Next group. Rain falls in a whisper, mixing tones. Water slides towards growing, living soil where roots embedded in earth, and a finch. Tendencies ripen his song with dripping leaves, remembering the dying storm. Breeze, graceful, naked repose, reflection, and doubt. And the next one. Rain falls, mixing water, slides towards furrowed growing soil, roots, earth, a finch, his song, remembering the dying breeze, naked reflection, and doubt. And the last couple. Rain falls toward furrowed soil, a finch dying naked in doubt. Rain, furrowed soil, dying. Rain, dying. So this is a progression of starting with a rather lush text into more depauperate. This is another one. This is from her work called Ghost Trees. And it's a poem that it can be read in columns or in rows. I'll just read it in rows. The trees mourn, weeping as forest voices slip to stillness. One by one, silence spreads over rooty networks. Where once vibrant chatter and gossip hinted of dangers, slow news was shared among wood neighbors, speaking languages of twig and branch, carried through the soil. Ghosts now remain, impotent remnants of what once was. Now emptiness haunts the leafy landscapes, forgotten by elm and pine and oak and beech. Phantoms without memory keep no trace of green life. Colors fade like lost pages from the untimely books no one can read or remember. So we've kept going with this. We've got an ongoing project. It's amazing. Jackie's an amazing thinker. She's an amazing artist. And for example, in my quest for soundscapes and my joy in listening to birds and listening to nature and listening to the way that sounds actually kind of reflect the health of an ecosystem. One of the interesting things is if you listen to the noise, most of the noise is coming from things like carbon-emitting engines and things like that. And it's kind of the noise of the world is a reflection of what humans are doing. And so I made some recordings in the Provo River just listening to the sound of water, and she began this work based on the water. And we're in the process of this, so there's not a poem that really goes with it. So she listened to the sound recordings that I made of water and responded with that with these luscious works that I think are amazing. Our current project is looking at the nature of time and duration. One of the things that science does really well, and it's important that it does, this isn't a criticism, this is actually just the way science works, is to reduce problems to their common denominator and to look at things in time. One of my favorite philosophers is a philosopher named Henri Bergson that wrote a lot about the nature of time. He got in an argument with Einstein, and it was conceded that Einstein won. But he won because everybody assumes time is linear and assumes that reduction is the right way to see the world, to break it into its pieces and parts. And so this was a little bit of a call out on that idea, and this was her depiction. When I say depiction, these aren't representational at all. So when I say that this painting was influence and about duration rather than time, it's not. You won't find it by looking for, oh, where's the duration? It's a poetic and artistic response to the idea of duration. So I'll read this, and then I'll read one more and call it a day. So this one's called Time Saunders and Wanders, It Never Marches. Einstein believed that time was linear, tick-tocking or talk-ticking as the direction of the flow of time's arrow can easily move tick-tock from past to future, as from future to past, talk-ticking. Cause and effect in lockstep, each ordered sequence of time steps, a cascading arpeggio, resisting complexity, harmony, deterministic fixity, resistant to novelty and newness, a mechanism inflexible to deviance and variance. Such metronomic views work in systems with no degrees of freedom, whose only fate in the end, mechanical stiffness in which time rolls off in regularity as predictable and as a frictionless pendulum. Stop such nonsense. Time is not a one-dimensional, undeviating course to fixed ends from standard beginnings. Rather, it is a wild thing in motion, process, and flow. Another view, time is a duration as wide as an ocean of moving fluid with currents that run deep or shallow and stretch across the globe, as wide as a planet, sometimes flowing one way and in others bending to new courses of complex patterns and design, sometimes joining with larger streams and networks of rivers and creeks and estuaries where time seems to stand still or disappear into a quiet place of largeness and emptiness, or streams that coalesce into a single mass, creating an Amazon river of underwater places, or that break off and peel in new directions that defy prediction or capture. In duration, time can blend into new forms. It can ride waves of light to new affordances and to challenge those who would inscribe us into stationary forms, to rethink their poverty of possibilities. The truth of it is time is unruly, but it always comes right on time. It arrives when it should. It denies all those who enter it the right to reduction. in its wild, complex appearing and disappearing. In time, there is no tick, no talk, only non-linear stirring, melding chaos and meaning. Meaning. So this last poem, it's a little outside of my work with Jackie. This was actually done in a workshop I was invited to with Jennifer Forrester. She was Joe Hardjoe's poetic assistant. I always thought it would be so fun to have a poetic assistant. The whole concept of that just blows my mind. So this one is about a sunset that I shared with someone, and it was during the time of the Great California Fires. So the sunset was spectacular, and I'll read the first line of this. I debate whether to put it first or last. I think if you see it last, it's more shocking, but if you see it first, it's more explanatory. So in the first 3 stanzas, all of the birds used to describe the colors are now extinct. The second part of the poem are the living species dying in the California fires, and it's about the individual deaths of those. So this is the poem: the California fires and a Utah sunset. Note all the birds mentioned in the first 3 stanzas describing the sunset's colors are extinct. Hand in hand we agree it may be the most beautiful sunset we've ever seen. Both Carolina parakeet red auriculars and yellow nape are present in the scarlet overtones of low clouds as they bleed into the king's yellow that striates the sky. Foregoing mountains emerge black as Hawaiian o'os coverts. The blazing orange clouds near the setting fiery orb descending capture light reflected from a least vermilion flycatcher's breast, mixed with a tint of the bird's burnt sienna cap. No blue in the sky is visible, save near the westering sun. The Christmas sandpiper yellow-brown haze dominates both directly above and hugs the valley below in all directions. Obscuring visibility, we wonder how the low stratocumulus igniting the sky for a moment escaped the smoky roof that floods the valley like the taint of a cursed inheritance. Particles from the fire swirl through the upper air, mixing and melting. Colors as Quela blending its hues as emulated memories, remnants of silent songs, complex processes stripped of information, voids all meet in the upper air in this, a roiling, noiseless assemblage of floating ash. I break on the thought, remembering singular specks of ash dust redirect a single photon frequency from yellow to red. So this bit from the body of a wren, this fleck from a Douglas fir, another from an orb-weaving spider, from a song sparrow or a ruby-crowned kinglet, a pine martin, this from a Seller's jay, a lodgepole pine, a list of sources for 100 million bodies sacrificed by fire, making up the haze, making the sunset, goes on and on. The varied thrush, mountain kingsnake, western hemlock, red-shouldered hawk, Anna's swallowtail butterfly, black oak, acorn woodpecker, chestnut-backed chickadee, red-bellied newt, Sitka spruce, and on and on and on and on and on. Each particle of the haze maps to an individual burnt to dust in an unforgiving sound, roaring flames. The number of species we have inhaled becomes too much. Watching the aesthetics of destruction in the setting sun, our hands untangle, our beautiful demise. I think that all of poetry and science are part of a human expression in trying to know and trying to learn and trying to understand the world. And I think there is a sense of critical time. There is an importance in being able to express what's happening in the world and what's going on. In my novel King Lear, Goatherd of the LaSalles, this was my most well-received and least read book. It was a semi-finalist for Black Lawrence's Press Big Moose Prize, which is for an unpublished novel. And it received a star review from Publishers Weekly. So it got a lot of awards, but no readers. So that's too bad. The introduction itself was by Mary O'Brien, one of Brooks and Terry's neighbors. She's an aspen ecologist who works in this takes place in the Sal Mountains just above Castle Valley. In fact, the demon who narrates, it's narrated by a demon who has given up the war, said, I'm not going to fight on God's side or the devil's side. I'm going to become an omniscient narrator because, he has that power. And he does live in Castle Valley, just down the road. So, but in this book, I depict a monstrous robot killing machine. This is a part of it, but it's become sentient. And as it begins to develop an aesthetics, it's a horrific aesthetics. And I think as we look in the world, those two possibilities are always held out to us. A monstrous aesthetic based on greed and avarice and islands in lakes and things like this that actually broker on destruction. And I'll let you imagine what a battle droid, intelligent, essentially weapon would value and what kind of aesthetics it would create. But I think that's what we need to avoid. There's an interesting article in Nautilus magazine this issue. It talks about dark aesthetics, these aesthetics of destruction that are really particularly concerning. I think we need to avoid that. I think we need, if we can fill the world with beauty, if we can create and make a place for the kinds of conversations that, for example, Jackie and I had that were artistically, I think, and poetically and scientifically meaningful to us in ways that allowed us to see things in a new way. And I think such collaborations we need more of in the world. I think that's an opportunity we should take. And I think that this conference is a fantastic example of those kinds of conversations and opportunities. So thank you for letting me be here.
Thank you again for the three of you and for your time. We have just a brief moment for questions and answers if anyone in the audience would like to ask a question to our panel.
I have a quick question for Brooke. So what is it cosmically? Why are you still alive?
I hope I find out. No, I just feel like this work of doing my writing and teaching and talking about re-enchantment, I think is my work, and I'm supposed to be doing that. And as long as I am, I think I'll be alive, so I have nothing to worry about. What's that? I'll take your word for it.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Stephen, your poetry working with Leishman reminded me of particularly that last one you read to us where you started with a bunch of words and then it diminished. It became less and less. It reminded me of a sculptural work by Felix Gonzalez Torres. I don't know if you're familiar with his work, but he did a work called To Ross, which was a pile of candy in a museum, and it was a piece of AIDS art, because the idea was as people came to the museum, they were invited to take a piece of candy. So it started at Ross's weight, and then it diminished and diminished and diminished, kind of as a person does who has AIDS and is wasting away. And so it starkly made me think about the way, I don't know, there was something, when I encountered your work on Flyway and saw and thought, well, this is so great because, this isn't a question, I'm just giving a speech.
Oh, that's okay. It's a good speech. So.
This is so great because I haven't got the time I need to read all of these great articles about climate change, and you've just read them for me, and you've put all the most important takeaways in this poetry, and it's like, it's like that's what we all need. We just need the most important bits to be yelled at us so that we'll get it.
Yeah.
Huh?
Sung at us.
Sung at us.
Yeah.
I don't know, what does it feel like to take words and have them kind of lose weight like that and waste away? Was that metaphor of wasting any part of your process?
It was. I've had the opportunity to visit a lot of depoperate ecosystems, and it's interesting in walking. I worked in Africa quite a bit, in Senegal, and I can remember an experience where I was walking through what was essentially a forest into where, due to habitat destruction, it was becoming less and less and less, and just the feelings that I had as I watched that diminishment of diversity and the way that felt to me. It was kind of what inspired the poem, is this sense of loss that and of course I chose the words that I kept and that I lost, but by the end the harms become apparent as they are what remain, rather than and so that I was doing that intentionally. It was the harms that were surviving until the end. It was just destruction. And so that was the kind of the effect on me too, seeing these ecosystems that have become depauperate in that way. So thank you.
Let's see, we probably have time for one last question before we get ready for the next session. All right, we'll go back here.
I just wanted to ask, this really applies to all three of you, but as people with stakes in the environment, with real emotional attachments, how do you deal with kind of the doom and gloom, which constantly seems to surround us? Sam, Mr. Rushworth, is that right? Rushforth. I see a bit of the pessimism, which is more or less inherent in a lot of environmentalism. And for the other two of you, I see a little more optimism. But I just want to ask, how do you keep going? What motivates you? How do you keep doing it, even in spite of the fact that sometimes it seems like we're not making enough of a difference, or we can never really see how much of a difference we're making?
Well, just from my point of view, it's I walk along the river each day. I look for butterflies and listen for birds. And I don't hold much hope for the human species. But there's a thing that has happened to me that is maybe strange. I don't hold the human species any more sacrosanct than I hold the other species on this earth. So if the human species has screwed up the earth as badly as we can, it's damn well time for us to try another experiment.
I think engagement is the antidote for despair. I think if you're engaged in something with your whole life, with your whole body, you don't have time to be too despairing. And I think of that, my favorite Zen statement saying, I think of it all the time, there is no solution, seek it lovingly.
Yeah, I agree. I'm really pessimistic on Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays, and then I try to be optimistic on Tuesdays, Thursdays, and on the weekend. So I partition out my my despair. No, that's said jokingly, but it seems like that to me. And I think what gives me hope are the voices that I hear coming in defense of our world. Ben and Terry are good examples of people that give me hope, that give me a sense that this is worth fighting for. And so it's in the, I think my hope is, I suppose I'm like a moon in a way, in that I reflect the light better than shining. I see these connections, like with Jackie and with others who have brought me to life in a way. And the reason I got so weepy during Terry's poem about the birds is that I find a lot of joy in the music and the interplay of birds, and to me that makes it worth fighting for and trying at least. So I'm not in despair until everybody else is. I find Sam convincing too. I mean, on Mondays he's my go-to.
Thank you again to the three of you for coming out.
Thank you. So good to be with you.